I'm naming my review of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order a glitch in the Force for two main reasons. The first is because a slam dunk single player Star Wars game developed by EA with no bullshit microtransactions or penny pinching schemes seems like something that really shouldn't exist, truly a glitch in the reality of our world. The story has more heart than any other AAA game I played this year, and the combination of lightsaber combat with a dose of force moves is, for the most part, executed well and feels fulfilling to engage with, although there are a fair share of hiccups along the way. But the second reason I've titled this review the way I have is because this game is a technical mess and severely lacks the polish that you'd expect in today's industry, unless you're talking about Bethesda, of course. Over the last month, I've been playing The Outer Worlds, Death Stranding, and Pokemon Sword and Shield, and Jedi Fallen Order got pushed to the back. I didn't even start the game until 10 days after it released, and yet the bumps and bruises remain visible. Is the game completely broken? Well, no, but there are numerous issues with frame rate, animations, load times, and pop-in models and textures. For me, it brings back bad memories from my most disappointing game of 2018, Kingdom Come Deliverance. It really can be that bad sometimes. Still, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is an experience worth having, especially for fans of Star Wars. You're gonna have a blast. I'm going to keep this review spoiler free because there are so many set pieces that will make fans of the series go nuts, and I don't want any of them ruined for you in the same way that Baby Yoda was ruined for me. Thanks, Internet. Anyway, welcome to A Glitch in the Force, my review of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. So, normally I like to divide up my reviews into three parts: gameplay, story, and presentation. But today I am electing to change it up a bit and discuss all the negative bits first, and then transition into all the good things about the game. The biggest issue, as I've already mentioned, is with the game's presentation. I never encountered any kind of game-breaking bug, but it's clear that this experience isn't fully optimized. Just like I said in my Outer Worlds review, the load times feel like they're just a bit too long for a game releasing in 2019. I'm talking upwards of 45 seconds to a minute on each respawn. Dying in any game never feels great, but the problem is always compounded by having to sit through drawn-out load sequences, and Fallen Order suffers from this issue. The funny thing is that the game doesn't always rely on actual loading screens all the time. Many times you'll jump into an elevator and ride it to a new area, or crawl through cracks in the wall. These are obviously designed to give the system time to load the new area you're entering, and they aren't inherently bad on their own. The problem is that sometimes you traverse these spaces and reach the other side, only to find the game hasn't finished loading your new destination. And I'm not just talking about a few textures popping in. Sure, that happens, but sometimes it's full models, such as cliff sides, popping in out of nowhere. In hindsight, this issue was mostly isolated to a planet called Dathomir in the second half of the game, but it cropped up a few other times. It's the most jarring case of this that I've seen in a video game in 2019, and shatters any kind of immersion you had in the game. For me, this isn't a deal breaker, but it's something that bothers a lot of folks, so be aware of that, and hopefully it'll get fixed in patches soon. So that's the loading times and the pop-in models and textures out of the way, but I'm afraid the glitches don't end there. There were numerous times in my run that Cal, our playable Jedi, got stuck on surfaces or on enemies, and he kinda wigged out like he had just heard the sickest tune from the Cantina band. But it luckily never got as bad as falling through the floor or anything like that. To wrap up technical issues, I wanted to talk briefly about the animations in the game. They're nothing more than okay. I gotta say this, and I hope it doesn't sound rude, but sometimes Sarah's eyes look like they're rolling around in their head, like they're just about to fall right out of her eye sockets. But maybe that's just my perception more than the game itself, but it was a little off-putting sometimes. But the walking and running animations of Cal are perhaps the most noticeably off based on sheer volume of exposure. I mean, how do you mess this up considering it's the animation that players are going to see the most? His walking and running animation is downright wonky. It looks like he just rolled his ankle trying to run out of a Sarlacc pit. It looks like he has some kind of permanent limp when running, and it just looks bad. He kind of shuffles along all goofy-like, and it looks really unnatural sometimes, and it constantly bugged me throughout the experience. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of clipping too, especially with the lightsaber. It pokes to the ground sometimes and walls other times, and Cal should have a few more scratch marks based on how many times it digs slightly into his arm, torso, and legs as he flails it around in combat. And also, the camera clips through walls on a frequent basis as well. And unfortunately, I don't have much footage to show of many of these technical issues, as most of my negative moments came later in my playthrough when I wasn't recording, but trust me, you'll notice them. The game lacks a lot of the technical polish you'd expect, and it probably could have used 6 more months of development to fix these issues. The technical issues are pretty rough, and so most of my negatives about Jedi Fallen Order fall into that category. But with that being said, I do have some issues with combat. Combat is melee based, but you do have a few ranged options thanks to the power of the Force. For the most part, it feels great to control, and I'll talk more about it later, but my biggest gripes are twofold. 1 with animations, and 2 with enemy placement. Parrying is a big part of Fallen Order's combat, especially on harder difficulties, but enemy attack animations don't always make it clear when the player will need to hit the parry button. On top of that, I couldn't shake the feeling during my whole main playthrough that the parrying window was constantly changing. Sometimes I swore I was parrying with the correct timing, but took damage anyway. Honestly, I could never get a feel for it, and that's the main reason why I had to finish the game on Jedi Knight, which is the second easiest setting, when I had started it on Jedi Master, I think it was, which I guess would be the normal mode of the game. Finally, enemy placement is another issue with combat because it gets really unfair sometimes. Most enemies are either melee based or ranged based. Most encounters are with 1 to 4 enemies that are either all melee based or ranged based, or mostly melee based with a few ranged based for support. However, in the later levels in the game, you get thrown into situations where there's like 6 to 10 enemies and half are ranged and half are melee, and it feels downright unfair because you can only parry 1 enemy at a time. So if a Purge Trooper is barreling down on you with his electro-charged weapons, while 2 Scout Troopers strike you with stun batons, and also 4 Stormtroopers are shooting you from a vantage point, it feels awful. Getting ganged up on is one of the worst experiences in this game, and stun lock is another issue that goes hand in hand with that, and it's because you can't be expected to deflect every incoming laser while also parrying 3 melee enemies at once. It leads to these moments where you have to do hit and run tactics which work, but it doesn't empower the player as much. For me though, that's about all the negative components I had with the game, so let's transition into the positive and stick with the game's combat. The lightsaber combat is built around calculated strikes and well-timed parries in order to turn the tide of battle in your favor against both stormtroopers and local creatures. The combat isn't as fluid as you may expect from a Jedi though, as attacks don't pull you closer to enemies like in games like, the Batman Arkham series. This is a good thing though, as it requires you as a player to not only deflect accurately, but also to make sure you position yourself close enough to connect on a counterattack. When the combat issues I mentioned previously aren't affecting your experience, combat is very fun to engage with and will certainly require a great deal of player focus and concentration on higher difficulties. What's most rewarding about it is that the game constantly is giving you upgrades to play around with in combat, whether it be new lightsaber abilities or force abilities like force push, pull, or freeze. These upgrades always give you something new to play around with in combat, and many of them interact with one another, and you can use them inventively to dispatch your foes. For example, you can wait till a stormtrooper fires his blaster, freeze him, force pull him in, and then launch him into his own blaster bolt to kill him. That's enough to make any Star Wars fan go nuts. It's the kind of stuff you'd imagine as a kid when you were pretending to be a Jedi. Sometimes encounters are there for you to mop the floors with enemies to feel badass, while others challenge you heavily. This mostly applies to boss encounters as well. Some are pedestrian levels of easiness, while others will really demand a lot from the player. Overall, the combat loop is enjoyable, but those previous issues I mentioned do bog it down a bit. Outside of combat, you'll mostly be exploring, platforming, and puzzle solving across 7 distinct planets, although 2 of them are kind of one-off locations. To me, Fallen Order's greatest strength, even more so than its combat, is its level design because it's packed to the brim with secrets and customization options to uncover. In a way, it's very much a Metroidvania. You'll stumble into obstacles that you really can't get past. But later on, Cal will have these moments where he has flashbacks back to his Padawan days and he recalls some kind of amazing Jedi trick, and they grant you the ability to pass those blockades. Levels are designed then to be experienced more than once. They want you to come back once you have your full set of skills to uncover all the game's secrets. The best part is that some of these secrets aren't gated behind upgrades, and discovering them early instills a sense of achievement in the player. For example, very early in the game, on Bogano, I was just exploring freely and I stumbled into an encounter with a frog boss that was totally optional. The world, the planet, and the level feel all the more real because there wasn't some big map marker pointing me here. I just kind of found it on my own, which is very rewarding. By the way though, the map in this game is fantastic. It's a 3D holo map that may look confusing at first, but is actually well organized and constructed upon further inspection. It's great. Of course, exploration wouldn't be very worthwhile if there was nothing to stumble upon, but there's a lot on offer. I've already mentioned the hidden boss encounters, but there's also upgrades to the health and force meter, as well as customization options for Cal, your ship, which is called the Mantis, BD-1, who is your droid companion, and of course, your lightsaber. I made sure to stop at every chest I found to see what was waiting for me inside. So you take these well-crafted levels that encourage meaningful exploration and mix it with fairly enjoyable combat, and it makes for a great combo. The cherry on top then becomes the incredible set pieces that the game puts you in the driver's seat for, quite literally in one instance. Again, these set pieces and moments are special for Star Wars fans, and I will not show any of them in this video. But wow, they made me geek out. For those of you watching who have finished the game already, that ending though, oh my god, fantastic. Moving on to the story now, and it really does play it by the books. It's kind of your standard Star Wars story. It emphasizes many themes we've already seen across the Star Wars universe, like temptation, honor, friendship, and perseverance. The narrative takes place between the events of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, in a time when almost every Jedi has been hunted down and killed, and the Empire now rules the galaxy. Our playable character, Cal Kestis, is a Jedi stowaway living on a scrapper planet just trying to get by without being noticed. One day though, the Empire comes a-knockin' for him, and after watching a good friend of his die, he has no choice but to join up with Cere, a former Jedi, and her borrowed pilot Grease on her mission to restore the Jedi Order. She informs you that her former master learned of a data source containing the names of hundreds upon thousands of Force-sensitive children before his untimely death, and she needs your help in finding it so that those children can be trained in the ways of the Force to overthrow the Empire. From the get-go, Cal meets a droid called BD-1, who was previously owned by Sayer's master. BD-1 is a slam dunk character, probably my favorite droid ever in the Star Wars universe, outside of maybe K2SO from Rogue One. The design of him is just perfect, and he's supremely helpful along the journey. He collects upgrades, he can hack droids, he can open new paths, and he also provides the mapping system. Watching Cal interact with him makes him all the more lovable too. Anyway, your goal then becomes to travel across the planets and unlock 3 ancient tombs to gain access to the holocron, which is the data source I mentioned a moment ago. Along the way, Cal is constantly challenged by 2 parties, the first of which is of course the Empire, who in this game is led by a Sith named the Second Sister, and she has a whole backstory that you'll uncover, and you kind of realize that Cal's gonna have to not only deal with his past, but also the mistakes made in the past by one of his teammates. And then of course there's also a character named Marin, who is the local leader of a planet called Dathomir, and you'll have to deal with her and her minions along the way as well. Again, no spoilers, but it's your run-of-the-mill Star Wars story. Still, by the end, you do feel a connection to these characters, even if they are kind of vanilla and plain. At least I did, and they opened up a bit more as the story unfolded. Finally, let me wrap up by touching on graphics and music, and this will be mostly positive, but keep in mind, it doesn't include the technical problems I mentioned earlier. So I kind of have to sneak this in because I don't know where else to put it in the review, so I'll just say it here. The best small detail in this game, full of great small details, is how lightsabers leave behind marks on walls and floors where they have come in contact. It makes me grin every single time I notice it. Moving on, the planet design is not only fantastic in function, but also in form, as I love the designs and atmospheres of many of these locales. Some of the scenic shots in this game are breathtaking and will make you want to take a quick screenshot. Each of them feels distinct from each other, and it's obvious that the developers at Respawn spent a ton of time to make sure that the planets and the life forms on them fit naturally into the greater Star Wars universe. Going hand in hand with that feeling is the music, and it feels right at home in the extended Star Wars audio library. None of them are going to have the same pull and grandiose nature as one of John Williams' masterpieces, but they immediately feel recognizable and belonging in this game. It's bold and grandiose sometimes, and calm and reflective at other times, based on what the story demands. The great visuals and music make the technical issues stand out more though, and I just wish they had been given a bit more time to finish this game up and make it truly special. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is about as good a single-player Star Wars game as we could have hoped for in 2019. With Electronic Arts having a stranglehold over the IP and their insistence on shitty business practices, it's shocking that this game even exists, but I'm grateful that it does. A slew of technical issues and some strange combat decisions do drag the game down a peg because they're simply too noticeable to ignore. Still though, when the game is firing on all cylinders, with combat flowing nicely, the upgrades coming in aplenty, and the story pulling you in, it truly feels like you're experiencing the newest Star Wars spin-off show on Disney+. The game is jammed full of references and Easter eggs to the greater universe, and makes a concerted effort to make you feel connected to Star Wars, whether it's in the big action set pieces or the small moments, like force pulling an enemy. It's grand, and it's an experience worth having. I know I wrap up almost all of my reviews by saying this, but I do recommend going out and buying this game. Hopefully by Christmas all the bugs will be patched out, and it'll be even better. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter @NopeNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care. Oh, by the way, did I mention the game is kinda like Dark Souls?